Hello and welcome to the No Ceilings NBA Draft Show. Today is a deep dives episode. I'm your co-host Nick Agar Johnson, and with me as always is my co-host Paige Otto. Paige, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great, Nick. It's good to have you back after you had a wonderful vacation in Japan. And I mean, it's almost June. We're one day away from June. And before we know it, the draft's going to be here. So, yeah, it's an exciting time to be a basketball fan.
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement in the basketball world. I had a wonderful whirlwind tour of Japan with my brother, and now starting to, get caught up on everything before the whirlwind of June begins. All of you will be listening to this in June, so happy draft month to everybody out there. We've got a bit of a different sort of mix up for today, and we're just going to do a roulette by position of some of our deep dives hits from the past year. So, a couple guys who are definitely going to be going in the draft earlier than the sort of second round range that we tend
Yeah.
to quote for deep dives, but a lot of fun players who've had wonderful years. A few guys who have withdrawn who are no longer on that guard list. If there's someone we talked about that you're looking for, they're probably not in the draft anymore. But still a lot of fun guard options in probably the greatest guard class I've ever covered in any draft capacity. Probably going to end up with the all-time guard classes, and we've got a few of those all-time guys right at the top of our list. So shall we get into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so the first two guards on the docket are pretty much, I think, at this point, all but guaranteed to be lottery guys. The first guy we're going to cover, I would be stunned if he falls out of the top 10. I'd be pretty shocked if he falls out of the top 7.
Yeah.
And both of these guys are players who we covered relatively early on in the year, sort of as they, a few games into their ascent. And, obviously from there, they continued to climb up the draft rankings. And we're going to start with the guy who is all but guaranteed to be the first guard from the Deep Dives crew off the board. And that is Keaton Wagler out of Illinois, who went from unheralded 3-star guy to really intriguing freshman prospect to clear top 7, top 10 lottery type of guy after a remarkable season at Illinois that saw him be incredibly successful on the ball, saw him be incredibly successful off the ball, and highlighted by his 46-point game, but certainly someone who has proven himself to be worthy of consideration among even the elite of the elite in this guard class. But I've rambled on long enough. Paige, this was your guy, so yeah, let's check back in with Keaton Wagler at this point as we're heading up to the draft.
Yeah, I think we talked about Keen Wagler, Nick, maybe back in November, December, when he was just starting to, start his ascension into what he is now, which is, a top 10 pick,
Yeah.
right? He's 6'6", 185 pounds. A lot of people, compare him to SGA just because he kind of has that funky kind of wiggle to his game. He's not the most athletic guard prospect in this draft, right? But if you're looking at Wagler, he, is a lights out shooter, right? He gets to his spots with ease. He can get to the rim. He can play on and off ball. And he's really shown that, he's going to, for Illinois, he had a lot of offensive juice to his game, right? He had a lot of offensive capabilities that he had to live up to with Illinois. And, that led them to a final four run, right? So, and I think with him too, that, there's a lot of talks that, the Clippers are kind of like a set in stone deal with him, which, I tend to agree with, right? Because the Clippers weren't even supposed to have this pick.
Yeah.
But, the Pacers, made a bet and they lost. I mean, the Pacers president even, tweeted out that, hey, Pacers fans, like, I screwed up. Like, I thought we were going to have a little bit luck in this draft, and, it kind of backfired on him. So they have to live with the consequences there. But, yeah, I mean, the Clippers, have the 5th pick in the draft, and Wagler makes a lot of sense, right? Because, him and Darius Garland kind of go hand in hand, right? Because Wagler is great in the pick and roll as well. And I think him playing with Darius Garland in that 1 and 2 combo is going to set the Clippers apart, right? Because obviously Harden departed. Kawhi had one of his best seasons in a long time too, just being healthy, right? We kind of got old vintage Kawhi back, which was such a great season for him. But, they obviously missed the playoffs as well. And I think with Wagler coming into the mix, it's going to kind of create some sense of stability for Clippers fans. And, if you're looking for, a guard to kind of wow you, on film with athleticism, highlight real capabilities. That's not Keen Wagler, right? He is a good athlete, but a different kind of good athlete, right? Because he can get to his spots. He has great counters. He kind of has that spin dribble move, especially in the mid range. That is kind of his bread and butter that he loves to, punish defenders on. And, he's a volume shooter too, Nick. He almost shot 40% from three on about 7 attempts per game. And he gets to the free throw line quite a bit as well. He got to the free throw line just under 6 attempts per game, 5-point, and he shot 80% there as well. So he's kind of a guard that is going to nitpick you, but then attack. So I think Wagler with the Clippers, it makes a lot of sense. And that's kind of the common pairing, right? But I mean, as we mentioned, this guy's not going to slip out of the top 10.
No, I mean, it's fascinating. I was thinking about this for a separate piece, which all of you will get to read at some point in the next few weeks. But thinking about, potential other teams for Wagler, it is wild to look at the stats for Illinois. They were quite literally first in the country in offensive rating. Like I will have to go back and edit what I wrote because I was couching it as like, one of the best offenses. No, they were actually the best offense in the country. And part of that came from, when Con Boswell went down with his injury he didn't miss much time, but in the time he missed, it went from, okay, Keaton has the ball sometimes, but is also playing a decent amount off the ball to, no, Keaton's the guy. Keaton's the guy driving the offense. And yeah, it's hard to do much better than first out of 365 Division I teams, right? And with Wagler, yeah, the athleticism is, a concern to some degree. I'm much more concerned about that on the defensive end than anything with the offense. I mean, he's proven, as you mentioned, he can get to the line at an incredibly high rate. The fact that he's 6'5" barefoot as opposed to 6'1" barefoot, I think is very helpful on that front as well, just in terms of he's not going to be finishing over guys. I mean, it's been pretty widely shared at this point that he had 0 successful dunks on the season, which is not something you see often for players of his height, but it also doesn't matter all that much when you can, I mean, he was just a hair under 50% from 2-point range, in addition to the 3-point numbers you mentioned. He, even with the surrounding talent at Illinois, he could and often was a one-man offense. And that's where the sort of discussion of, potential fits for him. The Clippers thing is fascinating because there's been a lot of smoke around that, certainly. I think the team that arguably needs him the most is the Brooklyn Nets, they were dead last in offense last year. And so you bring on someone like Wagler who can play on the ball or off the ball around Yegor Joman and Nolan Traore, along with Danny Wolf being a passer. He would slot in so perfectly to that team that just so desperately needs the offensive juice that he can provide. But the thing is, he had such a spectacular season that he might not even be on the board for the Nets at number 6.
Yeah, I mean, the Nets make a lot of sense as well, but I don't think, unless the Nets put together an insane package for him, I think the Clippers are going to be like, okay, we're going to get our guy. Like, this is Keen Wagler. So, and I think with him too, that he's such a, elite shot creator as well. And usually with these types of guards, because this guard class is loaded, right? It could end up being the best guard draft class ever. And if you look at, the draft board too, you have like 6 or 7 guards, that could go in, the lottery, right? And I think with them too, it's kind of like, what flavor do you want, right? Do you want a guy that can get to his spots a little funky athletically, but he's going to convert for you. He's going to create extra possessions for you. Great pick and roll guy as well. And I think him pairing with Darius Garland too, it's going to be a really fun season for the Clippers if they choose to, ultimately go with Wagler at number 5.
Yeah, that's the thing is even among the ridiculous guard talent in this class, and we'll get into another one in just a moment here, but it sort of feels like the buzz around all of this is that there's kind of a group of 3 that looks like is going to be the 5, 6, 7 in some order in Keaton Wagler, Darius Acuff, and Mikal Brown Jr. And then, another set of guards will almost certainly go right after that, which definitely makes things interesting in terms of, potential trade ups, potential conversations along those lines. But Yeah, it's one of those things where I think the Nets, need what Wagler can provide more. But again, it seems increasingly more and more likely that they're not going to have that choice because it's going to be the top four that everybody's expected since, pretty much November, and then everybody else after that. And it's going to be a run of guards. And if Wagler isn't the first one off the board after the top four, then you certainly going to be close. And yeah, I think the odds of him slipping past the Clippers are small. I think the odds of him slipping past the Nets is all but guaranteed not to happen. Like, there's
Yeah.
been rumors that I've certainly heard that the Kings are trying to put together a package to move up to fifth, where Darius Acuff Jr. would be the pick, at which point Blogler would still be on the board for the Nets. If he's still on the board, I don't see them going any other direction.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Wagler put together one of the best freshman seasons we've ever seen as well. He won the Jerry West Award, which is awarded to the best shooting guard in college. And he finished with splits of 45, 40, and 80, while also producing as well. 17.9 points, 5.1 rebounds, 4.2 assists. And you can't really get a guard like him. He's not like your modern day guard, Nick, in a way, because he has that blend of basketball IQ, craft, skill. But, no one really, looks at him and says like he's a hyper athlete, right? But he beats you in a ton of other ways that you're kind of like, the athleticism doesn't really matter that much to me because look what this guy is doing. And, he's only a freshman, right? So, and he led Illinois to a Final Four run. I mean, Illinois had an incredible season. So I think that's just gonna, carry him into, being an NBA player at the next level.
Yeah, at a certain point, you can't deny the production, and he's absolutely got that, and then some. And I think the other thing is a lot of the guards at the top are clear, like primary point guards and point guards only. Wagler has a lot more flexibility than a lot of the other guys in that top grouping of the guard class. But, one of the other guards who I think has that flexibility is the other guy who we got to talk about here up top, and that is Paige and Burries out of Arizona. And I'm pretty sure we covered him in December, which was basically right after the first couple good games he had following his really rough 5-game start. And it was one of those things where it was like the inverse Kendall Brown of like, he had a really rough first 5 games. It was like, okay, so is this going to be a multi-year guy? And then, pretty soon after that was when he started to absolutely excel. And, Arizona didn't quite have the season in the end that they might have hoped for, given that they were, one of the top seeds in the tournament, but they still made it quite a long way before falling to the Michigan Wolverines. And with Burries, again, he's got the size to potentially play both guard spots that a lot of the guys in the top crop of the guard class don't have. And, when I was saying earlier that 5, 6, 7 is probably going to be Wagler, Acuff, Mikal Brown Jr. in some order, I think 8, 9, 10 is probably going to include Paige and Burries somewhere in that mix. And if it doesn't, I would be stunned if he falls out of the lottery. I mean, after that, slow start, he just had such a spectacular rest of the season that it's hard to imagine he's not a lottery pick.
Yeah, Paige and Burries is probably my personal favorite guard in this class, Nick. I think he's a little bit undervalued, I think, and just of what he has done for his freshman year at Arizona, leading them to a Final Four. Him and obviously Jaden Bradley too were, a match made in heaven, really. I mean, we talked about Braden and, earlier this season too, when he was like Wagler, right? Just starting to ascend and, ended up being a lottery guy, in the 2026 NBA draft. And he is, he's 6'4", 215 pounds, awesome, creator in terms of, getting to his spots. He's a fantastic finisher at the rim. He shot 65% at the rim, just bullies you, right? And with, him heading to the NBA, that's one of the things that when you're watching playoff basketball and you realize that, yes, there's flopping and, the whole, talks about that. But I mean, he really hones down into his game and he's tough, he's physical, and he's intense too. And like as a point guard, you want that, right? And I think when you're looking at, the draft board, the Mavericks make a lot of sense for him. I think him and Cooper Flag could play extremely well together. And the Mavericks, they're kind of in kind of the weeds, right? I mean, when Cooper kind of started, he's like, I've never lost so much, in my basketball career. And I think Burries, I kind of think of him as a mini Jamal Murray in a way, just how he gets to his spots. He has some types of same movement mechanisms to his game as Jamal does as well. And I love that he understands how to play with his counters, right? He understands how to get his defender behind him. He understands how to get to his spots and use his footwork to his advantage, right? And he's not I wouldn't classify him as like the top athletically, but he's a great athlete. And his defense as well, like compared to Wagler, right? Like I would take Burries defensively just because obviously Wagler will fill out his frame, right? And once he gets to the NBA and whatnot, but Burries already has that foundation, and he's so strong and physical that I don't think he's going to have, a lot of problems that Wagler might have, adjusting to the NBA's physicality. But the Mavericks make a lot of sense at 9 for Burries. I've seen him kind of go a little bit lower in the lottery. Like I could see the Warriors maybe taking a look at him, but I honestly don't think he's going to drop there. I could also see the Miami Heat taking him as well. I mean, that would probably be my prime fit for Burries at the Heat at 13. But yeah, I don't know. I think the Mavericks make a lot of sense. I think Burries is a top 10 guy for me. So I would be shocked if he fell that low, but I could also see, him depending on, what teams decide to go to. But I think the Mavericks make a lot of sense for him.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. One of the similarities that Burries and Wagler have in common is that, they played with other point guards who are likely to be taken in this draft. I'm not sure where Bradley and Boswell are going to go, but I would be surprised if they're not at least selected at some point. And that, I think, is something that for different teams will be valued differently. But Dallas in particular is a team that might actually prefer someone who's not, super ball dominant, so that it can, they can have the ball in Cooper's hands a decent amount. They can have the ball in Kyrie's hands a decent amount, right? Someone who works as both an off-ball and on-ball player might actually be better for Dallas than someone who monopolizes the ball a little bit more. So Dallas would definitely be up there for me. I think, as you mentioned, Golden State would also be another really great choice for him. Have him come in, learn from all the veterans on the Warriors as they sort of transition into the next era of Warriors basketball. He's someone who, I mean, obviously any guard I think would love to play with Steph Curry for multiple different reasons, right? But he's someone who, again, his ability to be effective both with and without the ball in his hands, not to mention the fact that he's better defensively than some of the guys who are likely to go in that top range. I think Golden State makes a ton of sense as well. And yeah, I mean, Miami makes a lot of sense if he falls there, but I'm with you in that I don't think he's going to fall there. Like, I say this as someone who is a huge believer in him, who has him in my top 10, but I would bet that LeBaron Philon is the guard that falls if any of these guards fall. I don't think it's going to be Burries. And so with that in mind, I would be surprised if he falls past the Warriors, just both because I think there's going to be interest in him from Dallas, serious interest from him from Dallas. Also, because, again, I think if he does get to number 11, the Warriors are going to be sprinting up the podium. It's like, hey, we like that guy. Please, can we get Braden Burries on board?
Yeah, I mean, if he falls to the Warriors, like you mentioned, it's kind of like, oh my God, thank goodness. Like, it's sprint. It's like, hallelujah, because, Steph's, future is kind of uncertain, right? Because the last game they played, it kind of seemed like a farewell with him, Draymond, and Steve Kerr. And I think there's a lot of, like, uncertainty with that core group. And I think with Burries, he kind of just reminds me of like a steady piece and like for a team, right? You kind of like trust his instincts. I think he's a very smart, high IQ basketball player. And with Arizona too, I mean, he also played obviously with Koa Peak. Another guy that we talked about in deep dives, Ivan Kurchakov, that I absolutely love. I think he's going to be a lottery pick next year. And I'm kind of bummed he didn't go this year, but I mean, that's just another great guy for us to watch next year, Nick. But I mean, that Arizona squad was loaded. Obviously, we almost covered the whole Arizona roster on deep dives with Krivas too. But I mean, he knows how to play with, very, very talented players. And he also has a special skill of getting downhill too, because I think as I'm watching these playoffs, if you're getting, attacked on the line more, Nick, you have to learn how to convert and, convert over, high length size players, right? And be physical and understand angles. And Burries has that, and he has that motor as well that I don't really have to worry about him. He's kind of a guard prospect that I don't have to worry about. I don't really have a lot of questions. He's solid defensively as well. And I think he'll be a home run for any team in the top 10, or if he falls at least in the lottery.
All right, we've got a ton of other guards to cover, and we'll go a little bit faster through those, but let's take a quick break, and we'll get back with the rest of the guards right after this. All right, so next up on the list is someone who we have drafted, I think, every single time that we've done our second round mock draft. He's gone within the first 3 picks. And that is Malik Thomas, who at this point, given all the withdrawals that have happened, he might actually end up going in the first. But certainly he's someone who a lot of teams in that late first round, early second round range are going to be taking a look at.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny too, because his counterpart, Billy Richmond, he kind of did a fast one on us of like, hey, I'm declaring, and then I'm actually going back. And I'm like, whoa, okay, Billy, like, okay. But yeah, Malik's staying in the draft, and I think it makes a lot of sense for him. It's funny that, I think this early entrant withdrawal deadline was kind of one that caused the most anxiety over us, because it was kind of like, okay, now my second round is just filled with like seniors, and now I have to like do a lot more maneuvering in that range. And like guys that, I had Malik like 31, 32, and now, he's in my first round. And, if you're looking at, the bottom half of the first round, a lot of teams make sense for him, Nick. And Malik, he brings size and length. He can play on and off ball. He's 6'3". He has that shooting versatility to his game. Love his pay of place. Great athleticism. Love him in the mid range as well. And he can finish with either hand at the rim. I think size might be a little factor in his first year in the NBA. He just has to, like Wagler, kind of adapt to the physicality there. But I mean, he has that motor. He's great in transition, and just is a good basketball player. And when you're looking at the first round, I think the Nuggets could make sense at 26. I also think the Knicks at 24 could also make sense. And I think with them too, Thomas could fit in a lot of different places, just because he has that ability to affect the game in so many other ways. He doesn't need the ball in his hands, because obviously he played with Acuff, and even when Acuff was out, he had one of his best games of the season, right? He can score from all 3 spots. He's able to get to the rim, and that's kind of in that range. That's kind of what you're kind of looking for, right? A guy that can produce, and if he's coming off the bench, go in and, do the job that he is intended to do. And that's kind of like that's kind of like the statement piece of Malik Thomas's game.
Yeah, Denver is definitely one of the teams I'd be looking at late in the first for him. I mean, anytime you can pair someone who's got the kind of flamethrowing shooting that he has with Nikola Jokic, that's going to work out pretty nicely for everybody involved. I also am curious to see what Minnesota might think of him, especially if they don't end up bringing back Ayo Dosunmu, although I think they're just going to do everything they can to make sure he remains in a Timberwolves uniform. Yeah, I mean, they just need someone who can be effective with the ball in their hands outside of Anthony Edwards. And so bring on someone like Thomas who, again, it's a pattern, but I think it's, a pattern because these are the kinds of prospects that you and I both like, right? Okay, a guard who can play with and without the ball in their hands, a guard who, results may vary in terms of the defensive impact of some of these guys, but certainly with Thomas, he's shown enough flashes that I'm willing to bet, especially on an environment like the one in Minnesota where they have a ton of great defenders around him, right? He can definitely play a solid piece in a defensive scheme type of defense. And so it would be very interesting to see what he might look like on the Timberwolves, because I think he could check a lot of boxes for them. And again, with all the withdrawals, him ending up at 28 is a pretty reasonable slot for him to go. And as long as, he can do some of the stuff he's shown with the ball in his hands, then they just, throw him mostly off ball, have him, spot up, put up looks from there, but also be someone who, hey, if the ball swings his way and, he has to attack a closeout, he can do that.
Yeah, I think with him too, I mean, I can just picture it now. The Timberwolves is a great fit for him, like you mentioned, at 28. I mean, him and Ant playing off ball with Ant, and you're just, relying on him to, stretch the floor, especially off ball, because he, meshes so well and in an off ball role that you can really plug and play with him everywhere. And I think too, like during the regular season with the Timberwolves, TSJ was kind of starting to come alive and kind of settle down, especially when, Ant was hurt. But I think he could kind of fit in that role, right? It's like, hey, I'm the guy that's going to step up for my team and I'm going to produce and kind of shock people. Because I think like me and you knew like the capabilities of TSJ, like, flamethrower shooter behind the arc, gifted athletically, can, kind of put you on a poster, right? As he did in the regular season. But, he kind of shocked a lot of people because people didn't really know who he was. I mean, until, this season where he kind of came alive, if, you're just going into the NBA, right? So I think Malik could definitely shock a lot of teams, if you're not, and I think he would have gone back if he wasn't getting, conversations that he's going to go in the late first, right? It wouldn't really make sense for him because next year he would easily do that as well. So yeah, I think the Timberwolves, the Knicks there 26 through 28, and the Nuggets ultimately makes sense because him, Jamal Murray, he's kind of coming into kind of like he could be like a MPJ off the bench for the Nuggets, kind of right there for him. But I think he's a great piece to any roster in the late first round.
So up next, we've got Bennett Stirtz, who is someone who was definitely getting some, potential late first round buzz last year, but a lot of the talk around him was, okay, he's proven it at Drake, but let's see him prove it at a bigger school. And then he went to Iowa, and his stats were almost scarily identical. Like basically, like his steals numbers went down a little bit, but basically every other offensive stat was almost exactly the same, including him playing like all but 3 minutes of the entire season, which that's a bit of an exaggeration, but actually not as much as you might think. I think he averaged something ridiculous like 38 minutes a game. Like he is an absolute Iron Man who also, stop me if you've heard this one before, is incredibly effective both with and without the ball in his hands. And I have one fit that actually two fits that I think make a ton of sense, but one in particular that almost scares me a little bit. So we're recording this the day after the San Antonio Spurs won the Western Conference Finals, and Oklahoma City, didn't have their two best ball handlers outside of SGA in that game. They were missing both Jalen Williams and AJ Mitchell due to injury. And if you put Bennett Stirtz on that team, I have some concerns about his defense outside of the turnover generation, just because he's not the greatest athlete. He's 6'4", but a little bit skinny and doesn't, have the kind of wide frame where it's like, okay, this guy's going to put on a ton of weight. And also because he's 22, there's less sort of projectability in terms of, he's not a teenager who you would expect to just put on weight by existing and continuing to eat like a teenager would. And so there is that element of it on the defensive side, but OKC doesn't need defensive help, right? What they really needed, especially in that game 7, was just someone else who could take some of the pressure off SGA. And granted, some of that was just, due to their two other best options being hurt and missing that game. But given OKC's consistent philosophy in the last few years of just getting a bunch of guys who can dribble, pass, and shoot, I mean, Bennett Stirtz can do all three of those things really, really well. And if he's a good enough fit for OKC that I think they might even consider him at 12. But certainly if he's still on the board at 17, that's someone who, if they hold on to that pick, I think would be a really fantastic fit for them. And then also, I think Toronto, a few picks later, might also make sense. They want to have the ball in Scotty Barnes' hands a lot, and they also have a really good defensive core such that some of his weaker spots in that regard can be covered up a bit. But yeah, I mean, a backcourt of the future of Stirtz and Jacoby Walter, I think, is really fascinating and fits alongside Scotty Barnes really well. So that's kind of the range where I have Stirtz in, sort of that just outside the lottery kind of range. And I mean, OKC in particular, that would be really scary if they can pick him up and integrate him with the rest of the core they've got there.
I'm laughing because I could see it happening. You might have just spoke it into existence. I mean, Stirtz was the Tony Stark of college basketball, really. I mean, he and he has one of the best stories in basketball too, right? Started at D2, right? Went to Drake, followed Ben McCollum, and led Iowa to an Elite 8 run this year. And he's one of the best processors in basketball too. Special pick and roll player as well. And he had such a massive offensive load to Iowa, and he stepped up to the plate. Yes, he's about to be 23 years old. He's 6'4", 190 pounds. There's defensive concerns, but you can't argue his production and his shot making ability. I mean, and he even shot 70% at the rim too. And that was kind of a low sample size, but I mean, he's effective. He's efficient. He's not a great athlete, but he is such a high IQ player. And I'm hoping, I mean, I don't know, but I really love him at 21 for the Pistons. I think he makes a lot of sense there. And I kind of was talking myself into the Pistons kind of going for him, because at first I'm like, there's some other guys I kind of like more there, like Cameron Carr or Merez Johnson will definitely not slip that low. But, wishful thinking. But Bennett Stirtz makes a lot of sense for the Pistons, right? I mean, we saw in the playoffs, right? They need a secondary ball handler. They need a guy that can produce and just be, trustworthy with. Dennis Jenkins did an awesome job filling in the gaps, but he kind of, he obviously when Cade was hurt, he, was on fire, right? But that he kind of settled down in the playoffs. But Dennis Jenkins has probably one of the best motors I've ever seen. Honestly, I mean, he's just a dog, right? And I think Bennett Stirtz with Cade Cunningham is a match made in heaven as well. I mean, I can see, Cade coming out of the pick and roll with Duren and, floating it to Bennett Stirtz outside the arc and, swoosh, right? Like I can see him fitting into Detroit really well. And that's what the Pistons need. I mean, there's been talks that, Kyrie Irving could be an option. Kawhi Leonard could be an option, but I'm pretty against that, Nick, just because of everything that they would have to give up. I mean, there's talks of 2 first-round picks, a second-round pick, Ron Holland, Duncan Robinson, Karis LeVert, and in return we would get Kyrie Irving or Kawhi Leonard plus a second-round pick. That's not worth it to me. I think this is a draft of the guards, right? And I think Bennett Stirtz could definitely help us out there. So I think if he were to fall there, now since you have OKC in my mind at 12, I'm like, oof, I don't know. And the Raptors make sense. I mean, we've seen that Emmanuel Quickley is not the guy for the Raptors at the guard position. He needs some help, right? And I think Bennett Stirtz, because he is kind of on the older side, but he has that leadership. He hasn't missed a game. He's available. He produces. He's extremely smart player. And I think you're going to reap the benefits of Bennett Stirtz. And I think when we look back in, 5 years, we're going to say that whatever team drafts him, hit the lottery with him. So, yeah, I think when you look at this class, Nick, it's like the guards literally never end. You're like, this guy is awesome. This guy is awesome. Like any team that, gets a guard in this class, I think they're gonna be really happy.
Yeah. And, just quickly on the Detroit front before we move on to the next player on the list, I think, for all that the season did not end in the way that Pistons fans might have wanted, that team is very far ahead of schedule. And
sure.
Mortgaging the future for Kyrie Irving has not worked out for literally any team that has mortgaged the future for Kyrie Irving. So I would very much be against that as well if I were a Pistons fan. And if you can pick up Stirtz or some of the other guards that we have talked about and will talk about and just, hopefully, again, it's one of those things that I've been thinking about a lot with this draft class in particular of how some teams might actually be better off getting the older guys because, they'll basically lock them up for their whole prime, right? Like if you draft Bennett Stirtz, you get him from 23 to 27 and he hits restricted free agency right at the start of his prime. He inks whatever extension he signs. And, if you're the Pistons and you're the team that ends up getting him, you get all of the best years of Bennett Stirtz, the NBA player, and then, see how it goes after that, right? But especially, I was also thinking about this with Golden State and a few of the older players that they might be interested in. If you can get someone who, age is always viewed as a negative, and there are definitely, the obvious statement of, hey, if a guy's a teenager, he's going to have, more time to build his frame than if he's 22. But I don't know. I mean, especially as the draft starts to stratify more and more into there are the freshmen and then there are the seniors, right? And basically everybody else goes back to school. There are some teams that might benefit by taking some of the older players. And of course, I say that right before we transition into 2 straight players who do not fit the mold of what I just mentioned. And the first of them is Duke sophomore Isaiah Evans, who really the thing with Evans is you're getting shooting, more shooting. one of the most confident shooters in this or any draft class, and it's well deserved given how good he is as a shooter. But he's also got size at 6'6". I'm up and down on his defense. I thought he showed some real flashes. I also thought there were some possessions that he took off that he really shouldn't have and got kind of saved by Dame Sarr and Malik Brown, which certainly a lot of players on Duke got saved by Dame Sarr and Malik Brown quite a bit. And some of that is undoubtedly scheme as opposed to the individual players themselves. But in terms of Evans, I mean, I'm looking at sort of similar teams to who we were looking at for Malik Thomas, but it's a slightly different sell in the sense that Evans is much more of an off-ball shooting threat, spot up guy, cutting guy, bit bigger, so can, guard bigger players in theory. But I mean, I'm just looking at the Denver Nuggets and saying, hey, station this guy outside and have Nikola Jokic get him the ball. He's going to do fantastic in that situation. I also think he might make sense for Dallas at 30, not at 9, I don't think, but if you take him as the last pick of the first round, again, just have him go to a team that has a lot of guys who can have the ball in their hands, will want to have the ball in their hands, and have him be much more of an off-ball spacing threat. Most NBA teams, if not all NBA teams, could use a little bit more shooting, but I think Dallas at 30 would make a lot of sense for him as well.
Yeah, I think with Isaiah Evans that we kind of talked about a guy that we were super high on in the 2023 NBA draft, Jordan Hawkins, right?
Yeah.
And when I tweeted that out, people were kind of like, why would you compare him to Hawkins? Like he hasn't, lived up to expectations. But I mean, if you look at their games in college, it's very similar. I mean, guarding Isaiah Evans and Jordan Hawkins was a nightmare. I mean, they're coming off screens every which way, going off curl actions. And they have such a fast and quick release, and they have that plus size on the wing, right? They're so deadly behind the arc, but he can also, convert in the mid range too. And I think, as you mentioned, from his freshman and sophomore year, he took a lot of leaps defensively. He's able to hold his own now. He doesn't really get lost in rotations as much, and he's gained a little bit of muscle here and there. And I think with him too, the Pistons also make sense at 21, right? Just adding more and more shooting, because that was something the Pistons also lacked behind the arc as well, because Duncan Robinson was, kind of our only floor spacing option. Obviously Tobias Harris, right? But he kind of got brought back down to earth in the playoffs after his insane run. And, Tobias is also 34, right? So, and if you're looking at the Pistons there too, it makes a lot of sense, right? More shooting to go around Cade. It's kind of like, are the Pistons going to go for a primary ball handler like Bennett Stirtz, or do they want more shooting beyond the heart? Because my heart kind of does tell me that they're going to give during the max, right? And so I think, getting a type of player like Isaiah Evans that, shot close to, 40% from beyond the arc at 7 attempts per game, and you get that size and versatility there, that could be a way they go too. And, another option could be, you can't really go wrong. Like the Nuggets make sense. He could fit in that MPJ kind of slate, at his time with his time at Denver, and also maybe a sneaky pick, or maybe not sneaky pick, but also the Spurs at 20 as well. I mean, he could be, a Julian Champagnie 2.0 behind the arc as well. I could definitely see that happening as well. So I think, as you mentioned, every NBA team needs shooting, right? The more the merrier, and especially if you're getting a guy that is athletic, has size and feel to his game, and has improved defensively. And with the Spurs, you have Victor Wembanyama to back you up. You're going to be okay. And with Pistons, Duran, right? And Jokic too. I mean, if you have kind of a center prospect that is superstar MVP level, backing you up, the defense isn't going to be really a huge issue if you're, going to be able to shoot the way that Isaiah Evans does.
So the guy who's up next here might have the widest range of any of the players we're going to talk about here, if for no other reason than that he has the kind of game where someone as high up as maybe in the lottery could fall in love with him and decide to go for it. It also wouldn't surprise me if he ends up going, mid to late 20s, but I think chances are that someone's going to fall in love with Cameron Carr out of Baylor. And this was your guy, so I'm just going to let you take the floor here.
Yeah, I'm in love with Cameron Carr. And every time I'm doing my last dive on him, I'm like, God, I just love him as a player. And he had an incredible NBA combine, dropping 30 points, lights out, obviously physically and, athletically put on a show there as well. 6'6", 7'2" wingspan. One of the best shooters in this draft, like Isaiah Evans as well. But he also brings that two-way versatility, right? He's a stock generator, awesome rim runner as well in transition, can play on and off the ball. And like Baylor did, they didn't really have a great season, right? It was kind of him and Tunde Yesufu that we're the guys, right?
Yeah.
And he's not going to have that role in the NBA. He's just not. But look what he was able to do, right? He was productive. He shot lights off the ball. He's great at attacking the rim. And I could see him, being kind of like the draft darling, right, Nick? Like, I think if we look at 5 years again, doing this exercise, it could be like, how does this guy not go in the top 10? Really? Because I think I categorize him and Merez Johnson as kind of like, those are kind of the two guys that could go a lot higher than we expect just because of everything that they bring as well. He's an insane shot creator as well. And I'm looking at the range too. I could definitely see the Raptors kind of going for more shooting as well. But I think the Thunder, Nick, at 12 make a lot of sense. Like, I think that's like, we don't even have to do the draft. Like, it's Cameron Carr. But with them, I mean, he just makes a lot of sense because I don't think Sam Presti's going to let a guy like Cameron Carr slip to a different team. And I think with him too, that he can fit in a lot of places. It's kind of like, okay, I need a Cameron Carr. No, you need a Cameron Carr, but it's kind of like, who's going to get to him first? He's that type of player.
Yeah, I had OKC as one of the teams that I would definitely think would focus on him. I mean, it's not just his two-way play. It's not just his ridiculous athleticism. It's not just his shooting. It's also that he did an exceptional job as a passer, as a creator for others in a hideously clogged toilet kind of offense that, again, it was him and Tunde, and that was basically it. Like, everybody else, it was a struggle to watch them have the ball in their hands. The other team that I was thinking about for Cam Carr is a team that's sort of similarly positioned to OKC in that they have 2 first-round picks, one in the lottery and one not, and I could see either of their picks being Cam Carr, and that's Charlotte. And you put Cam Carr on the Charlotte Hornets, you slide Brandon Miller to the 4, you have LaMelo Ball, Colin Knippel, Cam Carr, Brandon Miller, Moussa Diabate. That's one of the best starting lineups in basketball. And, honestly, they were one of the best starting lineups in basketball without Cam Carr as part of that, right? With just the first 4 guys that I mentioned. So I could definitely see Charlotte, bringing him in, having him be this crazy lob threat, also a kick out guy, someone who, yet another ball handler who teams have to at least pay attention to when he has the ball in his hands, can create for himself or others. So either OKC or Charlotte, I think, would be 2 teams that, wherever he ends up going, right, whether it's late lottery or sort of middle of the first round, either of those 2 teams could pick him up in one of those 2 places. So I think they would, both in terms of the fit and also in terms of sort of the range of where he might go in the draft. I think there are a number of different slots that make sense for him, but I would definitely be looking at OKC and Charlotte, and honestly, the team picking between them in Miami could also be very much a Cam Carr spot.
Yeah, I think 12, 13, 14, you got Thunder, Heat, or Thunder, Thunder, what am I?
Thunder, Heat, Charlotte.
Yeah, Thunder, Heat, Charlotte, yeah. Tongue twister, but not really. Anyway, but yeah, I think that's his range, honestly, those 3 spots there, because he fits so well with all those 3 rosters. And I think with the Heat too, obviously you have Bam, Hero, Norman Powell, Davion Mitchell, Kings legend, Andrew Wiggins, Khalil Ware. Like, he makes a lot of sense. I think he would be an excellent fit with Eric Spoelstra, Heat culture down there in Miami. And I think you can do a lot of things with him. Like, I think he's going to develop in kind of like as this new era is like positionless basketball. Like, I could feel like he can do a lot for your team in a lot of different ways and kind of show up for your team in big moments just because of that two-way versatility that he has. He's grown as a playmaker, defensive playmaker as well. And I can definitely see him and Tyler Hero doing some, fun things together as well in the backcourt. So yeah, there's a lot of options for him, but I think his kind of range is that 12 through 14. So I definitely don't think he'll slip out of the lottery.
So from absolutely your guy to absolutely my guy, up next we have Ryan Conwell, who, he is, I read about him earlier this year, of just one of the most versatile shooters in this or any draft class. He's someone who he's bounced around quite a bit, but basically taken a step up every year and proven himself in each of those steps up. I lost count of the number of times I was watching Louisville games, especially when Mikael Brown Jr. was out, and it was like, Ryan Conwell, 17 points on 7 of 12 shooting. Rest of the team, 13 points on 4 of 23 shooting. Just things like that, where as much as Cam Carr was often the entirety of the offense for Baylor, especially when Tunde was out, it was a very similar deal with Conwell, especially, again, when Mikael Brown Jr. was missing time. And with Conwell, he's someone who, again, not the greatest vertical athlete, but a ton of other really positive athletic tools, moves great side to side, has a serious frame, like 6'4", 215, like built like a fire hydrant, doesn't get pushed around a lot. For as incredibly versatile of a shooter as he is, he also showed a lot more with the ball in his hands this year than he ever has before. He's not a point guard by any stretch of the imagination, but if he's your tertiary ball handler who, you're kicking the ball out to, and mostly you want to shoot, but also you're not afraid of him attacking the basket if there's a hard closeout, there are a lot of teams that could use a player like him. I think he's going to be up to speed on the defensive end of the floor sooner rather than later. And again, just in terms of that shooting versatility, I mean, he shoots off movement, he shoots off screens, he shoots off handoffs, shoots off spot ups, any kind of shooter that you could want. Ryan Conwell fits the bill for that. And so, two of the teams that we've already mentioned for other players, I think make a ton of sense for him as well in Denver and Minnesota, right? Two teams that, I mean, Denver is not going to have him have the ball in his hands as much as Minnesota probably would, but both of those teams are teams that could use not just shooters, but versatile shooters, right? Shooters who aren't just going to provide for you purely in a spot up capacity. And Conwell, in addition to that shooting, also has the level of defensive play where it's like, this is not just a one end of the floor kind of guy. So, I know that I'm certainly higher on him than many, having him in the back half of the first round, but I think Denver and Minnesota in particular are two teams that could very much use him and want him as, again, an older player who they're going to get the best years of his career if they take him. Those are two teams that are already, really solidly built contenders that need more pieces more than they need superstars, and getting Conwell at that end of the first round range could be huge for both of those teams.
Yeah, I think how you feel about Ryan Conwell, Nick, is that how I feel about Paige and Burries. Like, they're like probably like we absolutely are in love with their game and might have them, higher than other guards in this class, but we believe in the foundation that they have. And I think with Ryan Conwell, if you look at him, right, 4 schools in 4 years, started at South Florida, then went into Indiana State, Xavier, then Louisville, right? And his shooting progression needs to be, I think it needs to be talked about even more. He didn't play that much at South Florida, right? But he, on 2.8 attempts per game, he shot 30%. Then up the volume, got more playing time at Indiana State, 7.1 attempts at a 40% clip, 7.1 attempts again at 41% clip, and then almost 10 attempts per game this year at Louisville, and shot 36 or 35% beyond the arc. I mean, he's built like a fire hydrant. It's hard to knock him off the spots. As you mentioned, he can take on the load. Like, it doesn't scare him, right? He's a veteran. He is like, okay, like next man up mentality. Like, he's going to, fight for your team, right? He's going to step up to the plate. And with Mikael Brown Jr. out, we saw him kind of take over, right? It was kind of like the Ryan Conwell takeover, just because he's so offensively gifted. He's able to get to his spots. He is lights out shooter. He has such a fast and quick release. Not the greatest athlete, as you mentioned, but how he holds his own and how he, plays so intensely kind of makes up for it, in my opinion. And I'm not as high on him as you are, Nick, but I think if he, were to kind of go in that early second round, I could see the Grizzlies make a lot of sense for him there, because they got rid of Jaren Jackson, right? They kind of brought in some other guards. Walton Clayton Jr. is also there. Obviously, John Morant, Cedric Coward. You got KCP, Zach Edey as well. So you kind of have defensive pieces to back you up there. So, and I think with Ryan Conwell, he kind of fits in to Memphis pretty well, because he's a high energy guy. He produces very stable piece to any team's puzzle in that range. And I think for a Grizzlies fan, I'd be super excited because if you're going to walk away with Ryan Conwell and, possibly Cam Boozer, you're going to have a lot of great pieces for the future to build off of.
Yeah, and it might also not surprise you to hear that if he does end up being an early second round guy, picking him up for the Sacramento Kings, the team that was dead last in 3-point shooting, yeah, that could be huge as well. Just have someone who, the Kings are in desperate need of a point guard, and they're almost certainly going to get one at 7. So, to bring him in at 34 as someone who is comfortable enough with the ball in his hands, but for the most part is just going to be the kind of shooting threat who can work in any environment. I mean, during the 1 year before he sort of lost his confidence that Kevin Huerter was a real solid piece in Sacramento, the 2-man game between him and Domantas Sabonis was exceptional immediately. And, assuming whether or not, but certainly if Sabonis sticks around in Sacramento, the 2-man game between him and Conwell, I think, would be fascinating right away. Let's do one more guard before we take a quick break and move on to the sort of wrap-up portion. But let's cover Christian Anderson really quickly. And he's someone who, again, I think has a pretty wide range just because he's not quite in that sort of almost cemented top 6 point guards in the class. But if he goes to the right team that falls in love with what he could do, then he could end up going pretty highly in the draft. But he has an argument for best pick and roll point guard in the class, which certainly in the modern NBA, there are going to be teams who are interested in that kind of player. He also showed a ton as a shooting threat, and his size is a concern defensively, but he competes, which is a huge part of the puzzle on that end of the floor. And I'm certainly less worried about him defensively than some of the other guards that we have talked about and will talk about, but it'll be very, very interesting to see because, again, I think he could be one of the guards that sort of falls out of the range of where people might think he could go, but there are a number of teams in the teens, early 20s that I could see him being a fit for. And the biggest one for me is Toronto for, the same reason that I made the argument for Bennett Stirtz, right? You have someone who can, he was not off the ball very much this past year at Texas Tech, but with his shooting, I think he's someone who, again, could work very well with Scotty Barnes as a pick and roll, pick and pop partner on sort of either side of that equation. And I'd be very interested to see what he might look like in Toronto.
Yeah, I think with him too, he surprised athletically a lot at the combine too, Nick. He had a 40.5-inch max vertical plus 5.5 wingspan at the combine. And I think that he's not the best athlete on tape, like when you're watching him, but like in the combine and stuff, he kind of was like, whoa, like this guy has legit bounce. Doesn't matter, if he's on the skinnier side as point guard, he's 6'2", right? But that dude can flat out play, Nick. And I think, we saw his pick and roll operation with JT Toppin, lights out shooter from beyond the arc, very meticulously gets to where he wants to go because, he knows he's not the most athletically, laterally, but, really, he can really hang at the rim as well. He shot 62.8% at the rim, good at getting line as well, 80% from the charity stripe. And if you're looking at the range that, we mentioned, Raptors make sense for the same arguments as, Bennett Stirtz. Pistons also make sense there. I think that's a lot more common at 21 is Christian Anderson to the Pistons, which makes sense as well. But I mean, it kind of just, like I said earlier, it kind of just depends on what kind of flavor point guard you want, right? Because I honestly don't think you can get the pick completely wrong that you're kind of like, oh God, like we screwed up, right? I don't think there's a guard in this class that I feel like that. Like I honestly think whatever guard you choose to go with, like you're going to be happy with. So I think he makes sense there. I could also see him, going to the Mavericks as well, like to play with Kyrie Irving in the backcourt. And he's just a great point guard piece to start with, right? If you're going to get him in the late first round, you're kind of like, this guy dropped here. Like I think in any other draft, he would possibly go higher than he is now just because this draft is so loaded with, generational guard talent at the top. And it was for a little bit like, is he going to the draft? Is he coming back? Right. But he ultimately, decided to stay in. And like Malik Thomas, like I think it's because he's had conversations that, hey, I'm going in the first round. Right. Because I think next year he could have, gone lottery as well. But I think with Christian Anderson too, he kind of had a lot more questions. Like I know Nathan was super, super high on him this season. But there's a lot to like with him. So I think if you're in that early to late first round range, he makes a lot of sense for your team.
Yeah, the Pistons were the other team I was thinking of in addition to Toronto. There's a lot of reason to think that he would make sense in Detroit and just have someone who's, a capable extra ball handler while also being the kind of shooting threat he is. Makes a lot of sense if he's still on the board there. But yeah, I think the lottery contention point is a very key element of this, where given what next year's class looks like, given what Christian Anderson looked like this year, there's every reason in my mind to believe that he'd have a really strong shot at being a lottery guard next year. And so with that in mind, right, he almost certainly wouldn't still be in the draft if there wasn't a team that was in the first round that he was comfortable with the fit that said, hey, if you're still on the board, we're going to take you, right? Like otherwise, I think he'd be going back to Texas Tech and hoping that JT Toppin healed up faster than expected.
Yeah, for sure. And, JT Toppin, with his ACL was definitely a blow to everyone really. And I think for Christian Anderson too, he's great he's a 3-level scorer as well. I mean, this guy shot near 45% in the mid range too. Like he plays a lot bigger than he is too, Nick, which if you're looking at, short on the shorter side point guards, that's what you want to see. And Christian Anderson plays like that.
All right, shall we move on to our final 2 guards and then wrap this thing up?
Yeah, let's do it.
So up next, we have someone who, to me, falls in a very similar bucket to Cam Carr, not because of their play styles, because they're exceptionally different as players, but just in terms of the fact that they might have 2 of the widest ranges of any of the guards we're going to talk about. And that's Ibuka Okorie out of Stanford, who, man, for all the lack of help that Cam Carr had on the offensive end, Okorie had even less help. And the fact that the Stanford Cardinal offense was not constantly in the toilet is entirely a testament to how exceptional of a scorer Okorie is. I'm curious for where you're at with him, because he's a bit different to me than a lot of the guards in this class, just in the sense that I'm not as sold on his point guard skills as some of the other guards. I think the flip side of that is, you can only get assists when you have someone to pass to. And that was a lot of my argument about Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey last year was, hey, you don't get assists if the player you pass to doesn't make the shot, right? But even beyond that sort of basic level, I am more concerned about Okorie, both on the defensive end and in terms of the playmaking for others than some of the other guards in this class. But his scoring is undeniable. And, that's going to be the driving factor for whatever team ends up being interested in him. They're going to be motivated by just how exceptional a scorer he was, with, again, next to no room around him from, anybody else giving him any space to operate with.
Yeah. And, he was the focal point for Stanford, right? Like if he was on, like, good luck, honestly, because he has such a overwhelming, special, shooting ability and scoring ability as well. I mean, he set the Stanford single season record with 8 games of 30 or more points, right? He averaged 23.2 points per game, got to the line almost 7.5 times per game, and shot 83% there. Like he's a special downhill driver. Yes, he's kind of on the shorter side as point guard, at being 6'2", 6'3", but I mean, he has a long arms, long wingspan. He's built great. He's strong, he's physical, and I love his motor as well. And I think we talked about him kind of earlier in the year when he was kind of more projected in the second round range, or another guy kind of like similar to Tyler Tanner, of like, this guy could for sure, go back next year and, be good. Right. But, he ultimately decided to stay in the draft. And yeah, he's different, because I think, as you mentioned, a lot of people kind of have him in like such a vast different range. And it honestly, I think fit is really important for him, because, I mean, you mentioned you have to have players that can score the ball to get assists, right? And he couldn't really showcase that because, he was kind of the focal point of the Stanford offense, right? And if you're looking at his playmaking numbers, he had 3.6 assists per game with, almost 2 turnovers per game. But I mean, he's a high IQ player, right? He's good in the pick and roll. He's able to hit his shooters when he needs to. Yes, there wasn't, a lot of that, but Stanford, had a pretty good year in the regular season compared to, previous years. And a lot of people, if you're looking at, the late first round, are like, oh, Abuka Okorie could be like next Trae Young in Atlanta, right? Like I could see it there in a sense, but I don't think him and Trae Young play like each other. Like the only similarity I would say is like, yeah, they, volume wise behind the arc, like I see it in that sense of like they're such gifted scorers. Like if you're thinking of like James Harden at Arizona State or like Damian Lillard, right? Like they're just a point guard that can like take over. And with him, I think Atlanta could make sense there, but I'm more leaning that he might fall out of the first round, Nick, just because I think if you're looking at the back half of the first round, you have Cole Pete staying in, you got Alex Caravan, Josh Jefferson. Like I think I could see it going either way. Like if he were to fall out, I'd be like running to the podium. If, on the first three teams in the second round, you got Knicks, Grizzlies, Nets, obviously your Kings as well. I'd be like, yeah, let's get Okorie. But I think if he were, it's not like the end of the world for him if he does. But I mean, we have those players every single year that are like, why the heck did, he fall to the second round? Like, I think as, I mentioned, like Ryan Conwell, Wagler and Burries, like he is undervalued in the sense just because this guard class is so hefty that you kind of forget how talented all these guards are, right? And if you are, looking at the later end of the first round too, like I could also see maybe the Timberwolves taking a shot at him as well, maybe to play, alongside Ant Edwards. But I don't know. I think I have a lot more questions still with him. Like I still have to do like a huge deep dive on him because just because he is staying in the draft now, right? So
yeah,
I don't know. I could go either way with him, honestly.
If the Kings got an all rookie caliber player who fell to them in the second round out of Stanford for the second year in a row, I would be so happy.
It could happen.
It really could. And that would be, man, I mean, just the amount of shooting that the Kings so desperately need, it truly cannot be overstated how much that team needs spacing. And Okorie providing that would be huge for them. I also was thinking in terms of if he does end up going in the first round, I think Boston would be a really interesting fit for him. Yeah. They have a lot of defensive pieces that can help cover for him, but they don't, other than Peyton Pritchard, they don't really have quote unquote point guards, really. They just, they have a lot of guys who can handle the ball, but are bigger size. So they can run a lot of lineups where Okorie could make a ton of sense, either as like a 6th, 7th man type, just, bring him as one of the early guys off the bench, come in, be that sort of floor spacing threat, have the kind of defensive insulation that he would need. Also, for some of the reasons we've said, some of these guys earlier, if he does end up going earlier in the first, I could definitely see Toronto being a team that would look his way. Just, again, in terms of, hey, Scotty Barnes is going to have the ball in his hands a lot, but have someone who, is sort of a point guard, defensively, shooting guard, offensively type of player who, is that floor spacer, but doesn't necessarily have to do all of the creation for others stuff that is a bit more of a concern for me with Okorie. I think if he does end up going sort of earlier in the first, I think Toronto's a very interesting spot for him.
Yeah, that also makes a lot of sense too. I think he could definitely fit well in Toronto. And I don't know if we mentioned, but Okorie has one of the most, special senses of, downhill driving in this class as well. I mean, his ability to get to the rim, he truly understands, hey, I'm not the most athletic guy on the court, but I can, beat you off the dribble because he has such a great dribble frequency to his game and set of pace and play because he had to set it there at Stanford. Yeah. And, he's kind of like, okay, if you have to go through me first. And he obviously showcased that, in his free throw rate, right? He's hitting it at, 80% clip at nearly, 8 attempts per game. So, and I think the Hawks, obviously Trae Young left, they got CJ McCollum. And, they kind of gave, the Knicks kind of a hard time in the first round, right? But ultimately, obviously, fell short of that. But I mean, Kuminga was a great ad defensively. The Warriors kind of counted him out, and he's kind of proven himself again. And then obviously Jalen Johnson, right? He's a bucket getter as well. I mean, he had one of the best seasons as well, most improved player as well, and double machine, and to have those two guys kind of behind you, Okorie can go to work. So I definitely could see Atlanta in that sense, but I think it just depends like what you want, honestly. So I don't know, he could go a lot of places. My mind's like he could go here,
Yeah.
but I mean, I think at the end of the day, I think any team that gets Okorie is going to be happy.
And last, but certainly not least, I mean, he will probably be the last player selected out of everybody we've talked about today, but you're never going to get me to say that he's the least, given that he's been my guy for multiple years now.
Yeah.
Oweh out of Kentucky. And this was a miserable year for the Kentucky Wildcats, but Oweh was one of the lone bright spots. And, granted, his shooting was, again, pretty close to his college average. I mean, he's not an elite shooter, but especially over time, he's gotten to the point where his volume and free, abilities from out there, he's someone who I think, especially, he almost doubled his 3-point shooting volume this year, which is huge for a guy who isn't elite, but needs to at least be able to space the floor to some extent. He did that this year. He showed a ton of growth as a playmaker in a really positive way that makes me, again, he's been my guy for a while now, but, it makes me a lot more confident in his ability to be a connective piece offensively. That was sort of the biggest missing element of his offensive game in my mind, given that he's just consistently gotten to the line more and more, consistently improved his percentages from the line, and has always been just an absolute menace in transition in terms of getting himself to the basket, all of those sorts of things. I mean, there really isn't much that I have questions about in terms of his downhill game, and the fact that he improved as much as a passer and, volume 3-point shooter as he did is really huge to me. And all of that is eliding the fact that the selling point with Oweh is his defense, right? I mean, he's 6'4", 215 pounds. Stop me if you've heard this before, but built like a fire hydrant, right? He's not someone who's going to get pushed around. I think he's probably closest to being a wing guy of anyone in this group outside of Evans or Carr. He's not someone who is going to be a primary point guard anywhere, but especially given the development that he made as a playmaker this past year, I think it's a lot easier for me to sort of see the connective stuff in his game on the offensive end than there was previously. And I mean, defensively, he does all the kinds of connective stuff you'd want. He's really good on ball, but he's even better off ball. He's someone who, pretty much all rookies struggled defensively, especially at the start of their rookie year. But I would be surprised if Oweh is not a plus defender by year 2 in the NBA. And as long as he can, shoot at some volume and hit 35% of his threes like he has over the course of his college career, I think that's going to be more than good enough. And, for all that his draft stock sort of lost steam after his incandescently hot start to his sophomore year at Oklahoma, basically everything else other than, that crazy hot shooting, he has improved on over the course of the last couple of years at Kentucky. And again, this Kentucky team was a struggle to watch a lot of the time, but he was one of the lone bright spots there. And I think with what he's shown in terms of his growth on the offensive end and just continuing to be a really, really strong defender, again, I think he's almost certainly going to be the last guy drafted out of this group, but he has as good a chance as anyone of, being a second round pick and quickly working his way into a rotation, establishing himself as a long-term rotational guy. But I know that I'm way higher on him than pretty much everybody else. So I know I'm biased, but I think there's a lot to love about Oweh, especially once you get into the, mid portion of the second round.
Well, Nick, your team, the Kings just hosted him for a pre-draft workout. Mm-hmm. Him and Ryan Conwell. So It might be something in the air with, guards that have intensity, motor, and, improve every single year, right? And I think Oweh has such a great, morale boost. Like he kind of reminds me of, Davion Mitchell, right? And just the sense of like, he's going to do the dirty work for your team. He's going to, do anything he can do to win and play winning basketball. And he's going to, I say this a lot, but like rise to the occasion, because I love players that you can just see the emotion that they play with. And you don't ever have to question if he's going to give 100% effort. And that's Oweh. So, if you're in the second round and you're looking for that type of player, that's him, right? And obviously the Kings at 34 makes sense. The Spurs at 35 also makes sense. And I think with him too, you mentioned he's improved, year after year. And, if you look at his numbers too, in the mid-range as well, he had 9.4 2-point attempts per game. Like, he's a volume guy just because he had to be, right? This year he had a 28% usage rate, which is the highest of his career. And obviously he had that, game-winning, buzzer beater to beat Santa Clara in March Madness. That was absolutely insane. That, a lot of people, if you're just tuning into the draft and kind of getting out of college, you remember, right? But he's been a bright spot for the Wildcats. And I think the Kings make a lot of sense. He's growing as a shooter. He's not going to fit that need like Ryan Conwell would. But if you're looking for a guy that's going to, get down, always be in position, get low to the ground and just fight, he's a great point of attack defender as well. Otega Oweh is your guy, especially in the second round. But as you mentioned, we've gone through, a tons of guards that, fit different needs for different teams. But at the end of the day, you can't really go wrong. I mean, we didn't even mention, Darius Acuff, Mikael Brown Jr., Keeson Flemings. Like, we could go on and on. But yeah, I think Oweh with the Kings make a lot of sense. I'm sure you would definitely be happy. You would be, tweeting up a storm and maybe on our live draft show, right? Running up and down your house if they drafted him. But yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, the room in my home that I record in is pretty small, so there wouldn't be much room for me to run around, but there might be some jumping involved. I'm not going to lie. One of the teams
I have one more, sorry.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
I don't think he'll get this far in the second round, Nick, but I could see the Suns at 47 kind of looking his way because they need a point guard, but always not really a point guard, right? He's more of like a combo guard off ball, but I could definitely see like this Suns team exceeded everyone's expectations, right? They made the playoffs. Jordan Ott has done a fantastic job changing the culture over there because I think after, they got rid of Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, and kind of started over with Kevin Durant, got a lot of their, core pieces away. It's like, hey, where are glue guys at? Like, I think the super team era is kind of over, Nick. And I think it's been over for probably more than like we intentionally thought or people thought. Like, I think it's been over. Like, glue guys, win championships for you. And I think Oweh could just be another piece to the Suns' roster, especially the backcourt, because Con Gillespie was awesome for the Suns this year. He filled tons and tons of gaps. I do think they still need, a lead there, but like him, Booker, Green, and Dylan Brooks, they didn't really get a lot of playing time together until after the season because they're dealing with injury. Just like, okay, if Jalen Green's hurt with a hamstring injury, then Devin Booker is gone or Brooks, broke his hand, right? So having them together when they play together, you're like, okay, I see the vision, right, with them. And then obviously Kaman Malawach, when he, did get minutes and played, was super exciting, especially, looking at his long-term outcome there. Rasheer Fleming, a good piece. Kobe Breyer obviously didn't get a lot of time up with the Suns, but I loved him in last year's draft. I think shooting capability, like he definitely should get a lot more playing time than he did. And then obviously Mark Williams as well. But I think Oweh could be a great piece, especially at the bench of like, hey, he can at least bring versatility and energy and intensity to our team. And him and Dylan Brooks, like, I could definitely see. I think they would love playing with each other, and especially off ball too. Like, he's a guy that can get hot, right? And like, he's not gonna wow you shooting wise, but he's improved every year, and especially as a playmaker as well. So I could definitely see him with the Suns. I don't know if he'll drop that far, but if he were, I think Suns fans would be pretty happy with him.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the big 3-point. And really, honestly, last year's finals sort of drove it home for me of the 3 through 10 matters a lot more than just who's your number 3 guy these days. It's like you just need wave after wave after wave of players who can play on or off the ball, who can defend at a high level, who can fit into a rotation and just sort of complement your lead 2 guys. And I think it's a lot less I think you really do still need a solid number 2 just because, you can't have only one guy being the entirety of the scoring burden as, we saw last night with the Oklahoma City Thunder, right? When when J-Dub and AJ Mitchell were out, even with SGA putting on a heroic performance, it just wasn't enough. There is one other team I want to mention for Oweh, just because I think he's ended up on this team in both of the second round mock drafts we've done, and that's the Houston Rockets. And it's for a very similar reason of just, get someone in who, especially with Fred VanVleet coming back, right? They're going to have guys who can have the ball in their hands and be effective. So bring in someone like Oweh who can be, an off-ball threat on both ends of the floor. I think there's a reason that he ended up in Houston I think he did end up there both times when we did the second round mock. It's been a bit, and right. my memory is not always the most reliable, as I've mentioned before, but it makes a lot of sense to have him there as well as just someone who maybe he's never going to be more than a seventh man for a team, but he'll be a really valuable seventh man for a long time. I'm pretty confident in that.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense too. And I think this, every team does need a secondary option, like a second league guy. Like every hero needs a sidekick, right? Yeah. In this kind of era of NBA, how the NBA is going, it used to be no, I need my big three, right? But that's kind of been done and dusted, kind of like dynasties too, right? Because I think we're kind of entering this new era of basketball, and we saw, we're going to jump into, Spurs, OKC, and the Western Conference finals that concluded yesterday, but it's so apparent. And I think with the player that you're getting of Oweh, you're getting emotion, you're getting intensity, you're getting a guy that you don't have to, be scared of hey, if we put this guy in, is he gonna do what we thought he can do? He's gonna do it. And he, with the Kentucky Wildcats, I understand why Wildcats fans were what is Mark Pope doing, right, with this roster? It was they spent the most money on NIL and, college basketball, and, that it didn't really pay off, right? But if you're getting Oweh early second round, mid second round, you're kind of Kentucky guards kind of work out, Nick. So, yeah, I mean, it will be interesting to see where he lands.
There is definitely history there with Kentucky guards. So, yeah, you sort of teased it, but now let's move into quick hits and just sort of talk about the last NBA game that all of us watched and, the upcoming ones with the finals rapidly approaching. And, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the San Antonio Knicks matchup looks like, and, especially given how hot the Knicks have been. But obviously the thing fresh on most basketball fans' minds right now was the Game 7 that just concluded. And it's interesting with the Spurs in particular, because I think it's pretty obvious to everyone in the universe who their number one is. But I mean, I was a huge Dylan Harper believer last year, and in that Game 7, he showed exactly why anybody who was a Dylan Harper believer believed in Dylan Harper. And there is honestly a question in my mind of who of Stephon Castle or Dylan Harper is going to be, looking forward, right? Because obviously this year Harper pretty much exclusively came off the bench. Certainly had his moments and will probably continue to have moments in the playoffs, but pretty clearly Castle was the number 2 guy this year. I'm not sure what that's going to look like in the longer term, but that is a fantastic problem to have of who of Stephon Castle or Dylan Harper is your number 2 behind one of the greatest players we've ever seen in Victor Wembanyama.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you're watching the Spurs, it's kind of oh my God, these guys have only been in the league for 2 and 3 years, and we have to deal every other team should be scared. But
they lost 60 games last year. Yeah. Last year.
Yeah.
And then they won 60 this year.
Yeah, and I will say, I even got a little bit emotional last night when the game ended, because you can just tell, Wemby lives, breathes, basketball, and he loves the game. He kind of brought back not, okay, enough with that, nonchalant stuff. Caring is cool. He cares. The emotion was pouring out of him. He's crying. I mean, him, Stephon Castle, De'Aaron Fox, Dylan Harper were just, rushing to hug each other, and, it just meant more. It's just an awesome, it was their first NBA Finals appearance since 2014. It's amazing. And I think Wemby is slowly turning into he's in the GOAT conversation. I mean, he is just a special generational player. And when he didn't win MVP, he took that personally. And I think let's bring that back. Let's bring okay, I was supposed to win this, I didn't get it. It's a revenge game. I am out to prove that I should have won that. And we see that in every single game that he plays. And obviously Julian Champagnie too. He is just a sniper from beyond the arc, Nick. the Spurs are just so deep. They have so much depth to them. Obviously, and Luke Cornett too. Like when he comes in, he does what he needs to do. He locks down defense. I mean, he had that insane poster on iHeart yesterday. But yeah, this Spurs team is going to be very hard to deal with in the upcoming years, Nick, especially if you're coming out of the East. Like, yikes.
Yeah, just to quickly avoid getting added, 2 years ago was when they lost 60 games, not last year, but they were 13th in the West last year. It's not like this is way, way, way ahead of schedule. But yeah, just to go back to the point you were making, I was definitely getting emotional watching the Spurs, seeing how much it meant to them. And also it was, I think, just such a big moment for sports in general, where, after the last round, Wembanyama was like, I refuse to apologize for caring about this and showing my emotions. And if that's a problem for you, then yeah, I absolutely adore that. More crying in sports. Come on, people. Like, it's 2026. Just accept emotional maturity. I promise it won't be the end of the world if you accept that people can have emotions other than anger. It really, really would do good for your own personal mental health if you could get over that. So, not adding anybody specific, but there are a whole lot of people who that applies to. And so having Wembanyama explicitly express that and, just say, no, I'm not going to let you people force me to hide how I feel about this. And just, watching the post-victory huddle of all the Spurs, it was so clear just how much they mean to each other, how special of a thing this is for them. And, with all of that in mind, it is remarkable how quickly things turned from, oh God, the Thunder are going to win the next 74 titles in a row, aren't they, to, well, guess it looks like it's going to be San Antonio. And, both because I'm, literally from New York City, but also because they've had an absolutely incandescent playoffs so far. I don't think we can count out the Knicks just yet, but I definitely would be leaning towards the Spurs winning this finals, just both because I'm worried about how the Knicks are going to defend the Spurs team, and also just as you mentioned, right, this is certainly a key point on the ascent of Victor Wembanyama. And, it's one of those things where I forget who it was that tweeted this, and I forget the full list of players, but it was basically like, how many people in NBA history, period, have led their team to the finals as an undisputed number one before they turned 23, right? And it's like, it's LeBron, it's Magic, and like there's a few other guys, but for the most part, like those are the two names that you're mentioning in tandem with Wembanyama, as they were that good that fast. And again, it's not something that you see even among the guys who are thought of as these generational type players. You still don't see that among every one of those guys. And, a lot of what Wembanyama has done is sort of first since LeBron type of stuff. But the main difference there being, man, look at LeBron's supporting cast in the 2007 finals, and then compare that to just the player after player after player after player that the Spurs have, with so many of them being very, very early on in their careers, right? I mean, De'Aaron Fox being kind of a vet on this team really tells a lot of the story of, man, this is a team that not only do they have someone who is continuing to build his case to be in future GOAT conversations, but also they have so much young talent around him that is, they've already proven a lot, right? I mean, Steph Castle, former Rookie of the Year winner, and Dylan Harper, who on any other team would have been like absolutely challenging Cooper Flagg and Con Knippel for Rookie of the Year. And instead it's just like, well, I guess Dylan Harper might just be the next Manu Ginobili. What a wild statement to be able to make about a team. But they have so much young talent, and it's so clear just how close all of those guys are. Just from watching, like the 5 minutes after the game, seeing them all huddle up together. It was really nice to see. And, we'll see how the finals run goes. But certainly the Spurs have already had a much more successful season much earlier than I think anybody could have anticipated.
Yeah, I think I kind of look at it as like, how special is it that we're, alive to even watch, Victor Wembanyama play basketball? Because the first time I saw him play in person, and I think yours too, is, 2023 Summer League.
Yeah.
Where he kind of didn't have the best game, right? And it's kind of like but you look at him and you're just like, how is this guy even like a real person? Like just how he moves, and like you're kind of like, this guy, you know, is a legit alien, but you know, he's grown so much even from those 3 years of like, this guy's gonna be generational regardless, but just of how he's able to control his body and like his body movement and like the work and dedication he puts into his body to, has, you know, been on display too, because, you know, he's stronger, he's more physical, and he's grown as a leader as well. I mean, we both mentioned it, but I mean, you have to be a special type of person and player and leader for, you know, your team to give the same emotion that you're giving. So I think that's another, you know, knock to, you know, his greatness and to the type of player that he's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before, but the fact that his mentality is already as mature as it is as, 22-year-old, it's one of the things where, like, at this point, and I hate even saying this out loud, but at this point, the only thing that's going to hold him back is getting hurt. And, I think there are many reasons to have the hope that I'm about to throw out into the universe, but I think there's a good chance that he has a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar type situation rather than so many of those guys at those size who have just broken down, because it's the flexibility, it's the mobility, it's, all of that sort of stuff. And, Kareem famously was the first NBA player to do yoga and stretch in any capacity. And it's like, wow, what a wonder that he held up for 22 years and everybody else fell apart, right? But it's like, Wembanyama knows all this stuff already, and it's not just that, but it's putting it into practice, right? I mean, just imagine how easy it would have been if you were Victor Wembanyama to be exceptionally arrogant, right? Of like, yeah, I've got enough already. Like, I just won Defensive Player of the Year. I'm good, right? And yet every single press conference, every single interview is just him committing to being the absolute best player that he could be. And that drive on top of all the physical gifts that he has and that leadership that he's already displaying at such a young age, it's going to be hard to bet against him for a really long time.
Like, Victor Wembanyama is the type of, like, he went to China for kung fu training, and like, what other players are doing that? Like, this guy is just a special, like, human and player. Like, I don't, think a lot of like players that, are in that GOAT conversation are, going to be that would, do that. Like, he is very like mentally sound as much as he is, physically gifted and, basketball player sound. So yeah, it's been very, very special to watch. But on that note too, like, I think the Knicks should definitely not be counted out, because they split in the regular season too. And like the time the Spurs won, the Spurs only won by, a couple points. So I think it's going to be a dogfight. Obviously, Mitchell Robinson being out, he has a broken pinky finger too. Like, I think Cat's going to have to step up to a plate a little bit more, especially down low. And that it's going to be a tough battle regardless. But I think I'm leaning more in Spurs and 6. I think I'm more leaning towards that. But I mean, it's a great era to be, a basketball fan, because this is going to be our 5th different champion. Yeah. It's, Warriors, Nuggets, Celtics, and then Thunder, and then, Spurs or Knicks. So it's definitely exciting. And shout out Molly Morrison before, we get off the air, but she did a great video of, things that didn't exist before the Knicks were in the NBA Finals, and it was this entire Spurs starting lineup. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, it's insane. It's insane. But yeah, this finals is gonna be awesome.
Shout out to Harrison Barnes, who's like the one player on the Spurs who was alive the last time the Knicks were in the finals. Yeah. Just quickly, Spurs in 6 is also my prediction, but it definitely could go the other way, especially just, again, the Knicks have been record-settingly hot so far in the playoffs, and if they can keep that going, it could be I think it'll be a fascinating series anyway, but especially if the Knicks can stay as hot as they've been, they could definitely give the Spurs a real challenge.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So
all right.
Only a few more only a few more days until it starts. So yeah, it's exciting. And then the draft. So
getting close. Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be a busy few weeks for all of us.
Yes, it will.
All right, so she is Paige Otto. You can find her on social media at PaigeOtto_, and you can find her written work on NoCeilingsNBA.com. You can find me on social media at NBA Johnson, and can find my written work on NoCeilingsNBA.com as well. We've got a ton of great stuff coming up on No Ceilings over the next week or so, including, not to jinx it, but our draft guide will be coming out within the next week. So definitely be on the lookout for that. It's been ton of awesome work by the whole team. And of course, Tyler Rucker has driven himself completely insane, putting in a ridiculous number of hours on it. And I've driven myself slightly less insane, but definitely pretty crazy with all of the editing going on. But that's always a huge project for the team every year, and means the world to us when people support the draft guide when it comes out. We'll also have a big board coming out in the next week, so be on the lookout for that as well. And if you've been enjoying the show, please be sure to like and subscribe, whether it be on our YouTube channel or in the podcast player of your choice. And feel free to leave a rating and a review as well. 5 stars, always much appreciated. And if you've been enjoying the deep dives portion of the podcast, feel free to reach out to either of us via the aforementioned social media channels, or shoot me an email, nickaj.nba@gmail.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.